In this photo editing tutorial, we're going to take a look at window pulls. Specifically, how do we match the exposure value of the interior of a room that we photographed with a much brighter exterior? How do we combine those two exposures into one cohesive and believable image? So in front of me here, I have 5 photos that were sent to me by Martin Kubov, a Greek photographer who's seen my videos on exposure blending, and he's currently having difficulty in combining the interior exposure with the exterior. There are several approaches that we can use to merge these photos together into one seamless image. One of my favorites being exposure blending. Another option would be the flambient technique, where we use a strobe to light the interior so that the exposure value there better matches the correct exposure for outside. However, here we have a set of 5 images that Martin's struggling to bring together, and the first problem that we've got is we are actually missing exposures from this set. We have 5 exposures, which is what I'd recommend as your minimum. So the approach you want to take is get a good base exposure for the interior. So that's what we're at here. We're at 0.4 of a second, f13, ISO 100, 16mm. Everything's looking good here with this base exposure. We've then got a photograph which is 1 stop brighter, and that's going to help us bring back the shadow detail if we need to. And we also have one which is actually 2 stops brighter. In this series, our shadows aren't so dark that we would probably need this one. This photo, which is 1 stop brighter, should suffice for what we need for bringing back any shadow detail that we can't recover from this base image. The problem Martin has with this set of photographs is as we drop to the darker exposures, the ones which are starting to expose for the exterior, we haven't just dropped 1 stop of exposure, we've dropped several. We've gone from 0.4 of a second all the way down to 1/60th of a second. This darker exposure we have here is about 5 stops darker than this base exposure, and that is a big problem. Ideally, you just want to be stepping up or down your exposure 1 stop at a time, and that's going to give you the subtleties in the brightness values that you're going to need to create a convincing exposure luminosity blend, whatever you want to call it, inside of Photoshop. So to be honest, that isn't really an option for us here. So instead, I'm going to share with you a really good technique that can really save you bacon in particularly difficult situations like this. And I haven't seen this done before, so I'm going to take the liberty of naming this the HDR hybrid technique. Let's take a look at what we can do. First of all, I've done a quick edit inside of Lightroom on that initial base layer. If I jump over here to the develop module, we can see that I haven't really done too much to it. I've actually lowered the contrast, shifted the shadows and highlights around a wee bit, added a little bit of clarity and dehaze, not too much. I haven't done anything with the tone curve. But as with all architectural photography, I'm making sure that I'm removing any chromatic aberration and also turning on enable profile corrections. And that's just going to get rid of any of that barrel distortion or any vignetting you may be getting in the corners. From there, I've also jumped into my transform section, and I've just put a couple of guides, one down here and one down this line of the wall here, just to make sure that our verticals are nice and straight. And then I've just finished things off with just a little crop in, because I just felt at 16mm we were starting to suffer from a little bit too much distortion for my liking, just on the side here, and I didn't really feel like these elements were adding too much to the frame. If I jump into the basics section again and grab the exposure slider, I'm going to bring this down just so that you can see that we have got 0 information on the exterior of this building here. So there's absolutely nothing that we can save in this file. So we absolutely have to use some sort of technique to bring back the information here. And as you can see from the histogram in this file, the room itself is so dark it's nearly hitting black. So one approach to fix that would be an off-camera strobe, which is going to illuminate the room in here and help you better blend that. But that's a whole nother technique, and I'm confident we can still work with these files, even though the contrast level is so high, and we also don't have a contiguous bracketed set where we're dropping down 1 stop at a time. Like I said before, we've jumped 5 stops from that base exposure down to this image here, and that really isn't ideal. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to take this base image that we've corrected, and I'm going to select the other 4 images, and I'm just going to come over here to synchronize those settings. However, because I'm leveraging these files to create a nice HDR image, I don't want to build any contrast into this. So I'm going to turn off the contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks. I don't want any texture, clarity, or dehaze built into these corrections. All I'm really interested in is the geometric transformations that we've made, the lens correction, the straightening of the verticals, and making sure that the white balance is consistent as well. So I'm just going to hit synchronize, and now we have 4 photographs which are very similar to our original, except for the exposure value. Now with these 5 photos selected, I'm going to come and export them. Come up to export ... and the software I'll be using can either handle JPEGs or TIFFs. If you're dealing with real estate and you want fast turnarounds, then JPEG with 100% quality is a good option. If you're working with architectural imagery where the final output quality should be higher, then it's a better option to go for TIFF. Choose the color space Adobe RGB and go for 16-bit depth as well. I have a folder set up dedicated to accept these files that I spit out from Lightroom, just so that they're nice and easy to find. Now inside of Windows, we can see we have the base exposure, we have the 2 brighter shots, which aren't so important for this particular shot, but we have them anyway. And then we have some much darker images that have the information for outside. So we are definitely missing information between this, the base exposure, straight down to this. And here you can see just how dramatic it is, the jump between our base exposure and this one where we're starting to see the exterior. And there's so much information missing that it's going to be very hard for us using any technique to actually create a believable merge where we have a nice smooth transition from outside to inside. However, we are going to give it a go using Aurora HDR. Now don't panic that said Aurora HDR 19. There's actually a really comforting reason why this hasn't been updated since then, and Skylum say that there's nothing more they can do with the algorithm to improve it. And based on the results I see out of this software, I can see why. Look, let's come to open image, and all we need to do is just select the 5 images, click open. And there's a couple of reasons this is my favorite HDR program, but one of them is just how simple this is. All I need to do is click create HDR. It does some calculations and bammo, there you go. We have our exterior brought back in. Considering the limitation of the frames that we actually gave to Aurora to create this, I'm really impressed with the result. Now you can dive in and start playing around with certain sliders over here, like HDR clarity, for example, and you can make improvements by doing that. However, I'm not going to overcomplicate things. All I want to do is export this exactly as it is. I could export this as a Pro Photo RGB, but I'm just going to stick with Adobe RGB. So now I'm done with Aurora, I can just close it down. So now from Lightroom, I'm going to open up our base layer into Photoshop and one of the exterior shots as well. But before I bring this one in, I'm just going to make a couple of corrections just to see if we can't improve this. So normally you're working with contrast in the positive direction, but sometimes if your contrast in your scene is too extreme like it is here, your file can actually benefit from you taking the contrast into negative territory. I'm also going to work with the shadows and the blacks because I want to try and boost the exposure level that we have on the interior here while still leaving a nice believable exterior. So let me grab the blacks and push those, and you can see that as I bring those blacks up, we're not really destroying anything outside. Let's grab the shadows, and similar kind of situation there. So we can bring back detail out of this file. However, if I zoom in, you'll see the problem. It is absolutely so noisy that this is basically unusable. However, these adjustments can really help when we want to actually blend in this exterior with this original base layer. So we're going to use this, we're going to use this, and we're going to use that HDR merge that we also created. So I'm just going to right click and come up to edit in and choose open as layers in Photoshop. So now I've got my exposure for the room, I've got this exposure for outside, and I just need to import by going to file, place embedded, and select our HDR file and place that in and hit enter. I'm going to name that HDR just so I know exactly what that layer is. And usually if you give Aurora a better bracketed set of photos to work with, the result will be better than this. But to be honest, if we compare our original with what Aurora spat out, this is a pretty good starting point for us just to finesse things. But before I do that, I just want to show you why using this exposure that was so far away from our base exposure isn't really ideal for an exposure blending model. So let me show you what I would normally be doing. I'd be coming up, opening Luminosity, which is a fantastic tool if you're working with real estate photography, architectural photography. This panel, it's really affordable. It's like, I don't know, $30 or something like that. And basically just by clicking one of these tabs here, it lets you select the luminosity mask that you want. So you can refine things and have a tighter mask if you want, or you can have a slightly looser mask. But basically you're looking for the white pixels where you want to bring back the data. So this is going to allow us to have a very precise mask of the exterior exposure that we want to bring back. So then all we need to do is select the layer that we want to bring back, click mask, And that black and white luminosity mask that we saw before, that is applied to our file. But as I reveal it, what usually yields a really nice blend if these exposures are closer to each other to start with, this was so far away that bringing it back is just creating a really muddy look. This is not good. So I'm just going to delete that layer mask. Now you know why that isn't really an approach that we can use. However, we've got this HDR image that is really helping us on our way. And as I called this before, the HDR hybrid method. So what we're going to do is actually reveal that HDR layer, but only with 50% to start with. So what I'm going to do is come down, select a mask, and I'm going to press Shift F5 so that I get my fill dialog box. And now I'm going to choose 50% gray. And so effectively, that is the same as dropping the opacity to 50%. However, because we're working on a layer, that is going to enable us to paint back this HDR layer where we want it. So for example, if we want to see more of it outside of the window here, all we need to do is make sure we have a nice strong brush there. I'll press my right bracket key to increase the size. I'm just going to click and paint, and that's not working because I've got black as my foreground color. So press Ctrl Z to undo that, and I'm just going to press D for default colors. So white is now my top color, that's loaded to my paintbrush, and as you know, white reveals, black conceals. And so now I can pretty roughly paint in, and so now we've got 100% of that HDR layer pretty much showing through the window there, and now we have 50% of it through the rest of the frame. So if you decide there are areas that are a little bit distracting based on the HDR layer, so for example, I'm not really liking all the reflections that we have coming in here, all the light bounce on the walls, I just find that just a little bit visually distracting. So that's where you can come in, press X on the keyboard. So now we're working with black, and we can paint and hide the HDR layer. So it's not going to get rid of that because that was there in that initial layer, but it may just minimize that effect. Okay, so let's turn the HDR layer off and on, and that's how we can quickly bring back the exterior using HDR. If you feel that the HDR look is a little bit overwhelming, let's say in the foreground here, it might just be a little bit too strong when we turn that on. Again, we've got the option just to mask in the amount we want. So if I drop the opacity of my brush so it's still black, make it nice and big, and paint there, we're just revealing underneath, so now that layer is much more authentic to the original. But here's the great thing, we can take this very controlled HDR approach a little bit further by actually grabbing this darker exposure, bring it back up to the top, and if I reveal it, we can see exactly what this layer would be giving to us. I'm not interested in anything on the interior here, that is absolutely no good. However, what about outside? If I look at our before and our after, and I just focus outside, it's possible that some of this effect out here may help to just add a little bit more believability to the exterior. Absolutely, we could leave this like it is. However, the chairs aren't looking particularly great, and if you were to use this method, as I stressed before, with a correctly bracketed set of images where you're dropping down one stop at a time, boosting one stop at a time, that would give us a much better result already. However, we're working with some pretty extreme files here, and so this isn't a bad result considering. So let's just have another look at this and just think, okay, can we bring some of this back in? And this is where we could add a mask. I'll press Ctrl I just to invert that, bring my brush size down a little bit, and I'm going to reduce the opacity even lower, let's say 15%, have my white brush, and now I'm just going to click and start painting in this area. Now, of course, I'm going to be darkening some of the room where this bleeds over, which isn't really what I want. I'm just concerned about bringing back that information outside. And I'm doing this really, really roughly. I want to make sure we get some of that really nice blue out there. And then where we've bled over the top there, I'll just bring the brush size down a little bit and bring the opacity up. And I'm just going to paint that away. So there we go, guys, that's my hybrid HDR approach. So on the bottom layer, we've got our photo of an exceptionally high contrast scene. We've then subjectively brought in an HDR image only where we want it, predominantly for introducing the exterior again. So we've painted the mask in at full effect to allow 100% of that layer in, and then the rest of it was set originally to 50%, so it's interacting with that layer below with a 50% opacity. If I show you the mask, this was known as a garbage matte. It is just a really rough and ready mask, but it does the job of just bringing back in that information. And then with that really, really nasty layer that we had above it, I'll just turn the mask off here. Again, I have just roughly painted a mask over those windows just to very quickly bring back a little bit more richness outside, because it was just looking a little bit washed out in that original HDR. It's not terrible considering, but this just helps it a little bit more. To finish things off, I'm just going to create a stamped visible layer with Control Shift Alt and E. What a monster shortcut that is, but what a great one it is too. That's basically taken a snapshot of everything we've got and put that on a new layer. That's going to allow us to come up to Filter, and I'm going to invoke Luminar AI as a plugin. And if you do real estate or architectural photography, I would strongly recommend getting Luminar AI as a finishing tool. And I'll show you why. Let's do a really quick edit with it. I have my architectural adjustments saved as a preset, and I will apply them on bulk to all of my images so that I don't need to come in and do this individually. But I'll just show you guys what you can actually do. So I've just applied a bit of Enhance AI. I'm going to put a little bit of structure into this. Maybe come into the light section, probably boost the midtones, come down to the color. Let's see, HSL. We do have quite a lot of funky color casts going on here that I would normally address inside of Photoshop, but that's not really what this tutorial is about. So in the name of speed, I'm just going to come in and drop the saturation of the yellows and oranges just a little bit, and that's just going to help to neutralize the walls. At f13 and the lens that Martin's used, the image is actually pretty sharp. But I do like to build into my preset usually a little bit of Luminar AI's sharpen tool. I actually find the sharpening algorithm inside of Luminar does a really good job. I'm not sure how well this is rendering via YouTube's video compression algorithm. However, if we look at our before and our after, that is actually a really nice bit of sharpening. You can also play around with the small, medium and large details as well, but I find these start to add quite a lot of crunchy texture into your image. So while they are good, I would say keep those amounts that you add really, really low, really subtle. But let's still have a look at our before and our after. I really love this. One of the cool things with Luminar AI is it does have all of these amazing creative filters built into it that can really help elevate your images. And one thing I really like to add is actually the mystical filter. It sounds really weird, and if I push it all the way to 100%, you'll go, why would you add this? It looks very odd if I put 100% on, but I just wanted to show you the effect. But if I dial that all the way back, and that's none of it, and go to 100 again, we'll get a feel for it. I actually like to just put a tiny amount of this in, maybe like 8, 9, 10, something like that. So it's not really noticeable, but it just adds a nice inviting softness to your images that you shouldn't say, you can't quite put your finger on what it is. But if I turn it off and turn it on, I apply it very subtly. But now if I come up to the eyeball tool and we look at our before and our after, before and after, you can see that this just really does help to elevate your image. It gives it a really nice crisp finish. You can set up and refine your preset the way you want it, but once you have, it's so easy once you've finished your Lightroom, Photoshop, Aurora work, whatever, and you've got what you think is your finished image already and saved, you can then come in and bulk apply something like this, and all of a sudden it takes your image that you thought you were happy with to that next level. And one of the things I really love with Luminar AI is you can come down and it's got an overall amount slider. So you don't need to come in and individually change the tools once you've set them. If you think you might have overbaked things, you could come in and just say, you know what, I want about 70, 80% of that, and click apply. Your image is then going to be exported and spat back into Photoshop as a nice layer to work on. Okay, this video is more about that HDR hybrid technique for bringing back a window, i.e. a window pull for real estate or architectural photography. However, for finishing the image, I've just done a couple more techniques, such as straightening out the lamp that we've got up there that was looking really wonky, and some of these lines on the walls here, they were just also really bugging me, so I've just fixed those up very quickly as well. But if you guys want to know more about those kind of techniques as well, let me know in the comments, let me know what interests you, and we'll create another video around those. There are many other exposure blending methods that I use in my professional architectural photography work, but there are a few reasons why I really like this technique. One is it's super simple and easy, it's very quick to do, but it's also customizable. So if we jump back to that original layer and I reveal that HDR image that we brought back in, how much of this image you bring in, that is entirely up to you. Whether or not you want to bring in a secondary layer just to enhance the contrast, for example, like I did here, again, entirely up to you whether you add that additional layer in or not. For a lot of work, you can get away with just creating a really nice base image that you're happy with and then bringing back that exterior using an HDR layer. So I'm going to sign off, guys, with a quick look at our before and our after. This is what we started with. This is what we finished up with. Hope this has been useful, guys. I'll see you in the next video.